And good evening. I came across this little bit in a book recently, and I thrill to it every time I think about it. So I want to share it with you, and it's from the Bishop Berkeley. Whatever the world thinks, he who hath not meditated much upon God, the mind, and the ultimate reality, may possibly make a thriving earthworm, but will certainly make a sorry patriot or statesman. Let us remember this. A person may become a very worthy human being. They may attain great heights in the human world. But if they haven't learned to meditate, if they haven't learned to touch the spiritual center of their being, the best they can really hope to be is an earthworm. Formerly, I used to refer to those people as the unburied dead, or the dead who still walk. But in England, they told me that's not elegant. I should call them cabbages. But this man has a good one, earthworm. Now, tonight, we come to a subject that is really going to be puzzling for a while, because this goes beyond what you have received in the infinite way. And so far as I know, it doesn't exist anywhere in the literature of the world, religious, philosophical, metaphysical, or mystical. And you can imagine that I approach the subject not lightly. A revelation was given to me in New York in March. It took place while I was on the platform. And the revelation was this. It was the secret of the first and second chapters of Genesis. And I saw that the first chapter of Genesis, which we call the story of the real creation, is just that, the story, the unfoldment of a spiritual universe. Evidently, that first chapter of Genesis is the work of a mystic who had made the complete union with God, and who saw that this entire universe is consciousness appearing as form. When you have consciousness appearing as form, it can appear as a seed, or it can appear as a whole tree without ever going through the process of growing. Consciousness can appear in any form. It doesn't have to appear as a baby and grow to adulthood. Consciousness can appear right before your eyes as a full-grown, fully matured person. And that is the record of the first chapter of Genesis. Therein you find that the crops were in the ground before the seeds were planted. You find that there was light before there was a sun or a moon. Now, this is your creation as it has been revealed as the activity of consciousness, as it is in all of its purity, and think of this now, in its immortality and eternality. For that which is formed of consciousness never was born. It is just an emanation of consciousness, but still consciousness. Consciousness formed. And it not only had no beginning, it has no ending, because as long as there is consciousness, there is consciousness formed. Here you have the secret of pre-existence and of after-existence. Here you have the secret of karma, because you can see that in that creation everyone has karma, the karma of God, the will of God, the life of God, the love of God, the purity of God, and therefore they are destined to fulfill the karma of eternality and immortality and peace on earth and goodwill toward men. In other words, there is no evil karma. Whatever of karma there is fulfillment. Consciousness fulfilling itself and destined to fulfill itself. When the Master speaks of that, he says, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. But you see, if you have been sown of the Spirit, you can only reap the Spirit. That is your spiritual destiny or spiritual karma. Now this much is known and always has been known, although I believe the first literature to bring it to light is the revelation of Swedenborg, who wrote the book on Genesis and on the Apocalypse, and revealed this first chapter, the spiritual creation. He also wrote the second chapter, which is called the unreal creation or unreal world. Those of you who are familiar with Christian Science realize that in the textbook they also have this first and second chapter of Genesis as it was revealed in the writings of Swedenborg. Follows the same identical line. But what is known of this unreal creation? What does it consist of? Where does it come from? That there is no record in either of those writings. Where does it come from? How does it start? What is it made up from? How is it eliminated? I can tell you the last part first, how it's eliminated, by knowing what caused it. And that was the revelation that came on that platform. The second chapter of Genesis is a revelation of the creation of mind. The first is spirit, and the second is mind. Mind appearing as thoughts, changeable, just as changeable as the weather. And the reason it's changeable is that the moment you reach the realm of mind, you reach that which destroyed the Garden of Eden, or the first creation. You reach good and evil. Who is there that hasn't had good thoughts? Who is there that hasn't had evil thoughts? Who is there that hasn't had pleasant thoughts, unpleasant thoughts, healthy thoughts, sickly thoughts, pure thoughts, sinful thoughts? All thoughts that emanate from the mind are of good and evil. And that's where your entire second chapter of Genesis comes from. A mental creation, not spirit, not soul, not consciousness, but a mind that thinks, and therefore thinks good and thinks evil. A mind that thinks correctly and a mind that thinks incorrectly, because it hasn't the original plan, that is, consciousness for its guide. Now, the very moment that you know that the second chapter of Genesis is mind in action, you have the secret of its destruction. Rise above mind. Get away from thoughts. God's thoughts are not your thoughts. God's ways are not your ways. Rise above your thoughts, and you will find that you can't think God's thoughts, but God can utter His word through you. But not until you transcend mind. Not until you transcend thoughts. This entire sense world, then, that which you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, has no existence at all except as a creation of mind which changes, which is finite, which is unreal, unstable, and has nothing to support it except that which creates thoughts, thoughts that are good and thoughts that are evil. Now, as you remember the Garden of Eden, you will remember why Adam and Eve were thrown out of the Garden of Evil. Do you know why? Do you remember why? Because they discovered good and evil. And so I saw on the platform the whole scene. That our exit from heaven, from the original Eden in which there was no sin, no disease, no awareness of anything to be ashamed of or afraid of, our emergence from that was caused by our discovery, which could only have come out of a mind, of good and evil. Good and evil come forth from the thinking mind, the reasoning mind, the mind that judges by appearances. And anyone who indulges it is outside of Eden, outside of the kingdom of God. And there's no way back until you can rise above good and evil. Now, metaphysically, you have been struggling for years to rise above the evil. And it is very evident that you have made some measure of progress out of evil, but only into good, a good which lapses into evil, out of sickness into health which becomes old age, being saved from death to live a life that ends in death, coming out of sin into purity that can at any moment lapse back into sin. The metaphysical world has given us the first start on our trip back to heaven, in that it has told us we must rise above evil, more especially the evil thoughts that produce the evil conditions. But for many years now, the infinite ray has been revealing to you that you have to rise above good thoughts. You have to rise above good health. You have to rise above good wealth. You have to rise above good just the same as you have to rise above evil. And in that revelation last March, I saw the reason. I saw the whole of the Garden of Eden. I saw the whole of that purest state that flows out from a divine consciousness, which is the childlike mind that knows neither good nor evil. And then I saw what happens to us the moment we know good and evil. struggle out of one into the other, out of the other into the one, back and forth, good and evil, health and sickness, life and death. And the vision revealed itself that we have in our healing work. To heal, it is necessary to transcend thought. Even though a meditation begin as a contemplation of truth, it must, before the healing can be accomplished, rise into the higher realm of silent awareness. To start a healing meditation, one instantly listens for what may come from within. Often a passage of truth comes into thought. It may at first repeat itself over and over, such as, "Henceforth know we no man after the flesh." After this has repeated itself several times, or after we have consciously repeated it, thought slows down as we ponder the meaning of the statement. "Henceforth know we no man after the flesh." Now we perceive that man is not flesh, but consciousness, spiritual being, spiritual qualities. We discern that there is a creative principle which produces its own image and likeness, that this also is a sustaining principle of life, and therefore its creation must necessarily be of its own essence, life, love, spirit, soul, and this is the nature of man. It is seen that the visible man, whether sick or well, is not that man, but rather the Christ self, or spiritual self, is truly man, and therefore not subject to the law of flesh, not even harmonious flesh, but rather is subject only to Christ, divine sonship. Soon one reaches the end of such mental cogitation or contemplation, and settles into a quiet, peaceful state of receptivity into which no thought intrudes. And here the healing Christ, or Spirit of God, takes over, maintains a tranquility and peace, a spiritual peace be still. And from this emanates a healing grace which envelops one or one's patient, and harmony becomes apparent and tangible in experience. You see, as long as we are knowing the truth, as long as we are thinking truth, declaring truth, voicing truth, we are in the mental realm. We may be thinking of spiritual things, but we're thinking of spiritual things mentally. And no healing takes place. If it did, and it does sometimes through mental argument, there are healings, but they're not spiritual healings, they're suggestion. They're just the fruitage of saying you are well, you are perfect, or God's will is done in you, and you accept that suggestion in your mind and you respond to it, and you've had a mental healing. You've had a psychological healing or a psychosomatic healing. But it hasn't been spiritual because you have responded to the suggestion of another mind. Now in our work, we don't make suggestions. We never use the word you in a treatment. We never use your name, nor do we take the name of your disease or complaint or condition, nor do we ever let you enter our thought after you've asked for help. Even though we are still on the mental realm when we cogitate or meditate or contemplate, it isn't about you, it's about God and the things of God that we know, or the laws of God that we understand, or that we've read. But We don't expect healing from that, because you can't bring forth the Son of God in the 2nd chapter of Genesis. You can't do that. Out in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, you have the fallen Adam, the man of flesh. Now, the only way that this man of flesh can be restored to Eden, to his normal spiritual harmony, is not by thinking things about him, but by entering into a state of silence which recognizes neither good nor evil. Now, you have heard this in the message of the Infinite Way, that you have no right to have desires, not even right desires. You have no right even to want to be a healer or a teacher. You have no right to desire to do any form of spiritual work. You're not entitled to have a desire in the Infinite Way, beyond the desire to know God aright, whom to know aright is life eternal. Now, when you have no desire, you have no good desire. And you have no desire for good any more than you have a desire for evil. Now you are pure enough to be in the Garden of Eden, which was desireless. It didn't even desire good. It was content with being. Adam and Eve in their original estate were being, and they loved it. They were just being. They had all that they needed by grace. They had, why not? They were constituted of God. God was their being. God was their life. God even constituted their body. That's why they were pure. They were desireless. Without desire, all they had to do was walk up and down all day long, enjoying the good things of life, but they decided to know good and evil. And that's where they walked right out of the Garden of Eden into the man of earth. That's where they walked out to where you have to earn your living by the sweat of your brow, bring forth children in pain. There is where you have good and evil, and the moment you have good and evil, you have a house divided against itself. And when you desire, while you think you're desiring good, you haven't the least way of knowing how harmful it may be. Even as wonderful a thing as having $1 million can be awfully harmful and destructive, and many have found it so. Now then, having health sometimes can lead to dissipations. When you know that your entire world that's made up of good and evil is the emanation of mind, you have a remedy at hand. Rise above mind. That came back at me very quickly. How do you do that? Why, the Master gave us the formula. Judge not after appearances. Don't decide that you know what is good or evil. That's the only way you can do it. When anything is presented to your sight, to your 5 physical senses, don't jump to the conclusion that it's good, and don't jump to the conclusion that it's evil. Just agree that it is. But that's all. It is. It exists. But you're giving it no quality. As when I say, this is my hand and my arm, don't jump to the conclusion that it's very good and you'd like to shake it. Don't do it. Just agree that it's a hand and an arm. Why? Because we saw the other night, it isn't a good hand and it isn't an evil hand. It's just a hand. If there are any qualities here of giving, of good, they're my qualities, not my hand's. My hand can only carry out my will. if there's any evil in our human picture to this hand or arm, then those are my qualities, not the hand's. So don't call the hand good or evil. Well, of course, that's clear to you, but now you must go the whole hog. You have to be able to look at me completely, the visible and the invisible, and say, I know thee. You are neither good nor evil. You just are. And that which controls you is good. It's God, the invisible. But you yourself are neither good nor evil. And if you can look at me and feel that way, and know that I'm looking right at you and feeling that same way, it's easier for me because I don't know many of you, and so I can say I don't know whether you're good or evil. But I go further than that. I wouldn't care how well I knew you, I still say you are not good and evil. If there's any evil about you, that is merely what Paul referred to, not as your evil, but a sense of sin that still bothers you. So it still isn't you, even if it appears to be. But no matter how good you may be, I can go along with the Master and say it isn't you that's good. There is only one good, the Father in heaven. And so I withdraw from you all judgment as to whether you are good or evil, and I understand that God is your life. And that satisfies me. God is your mind. God is your soul. God is your spirit. And God constitutes the very body you are walking in. And isn't that better than for me to be judging as to whether it's good and evil, and perhaps if you're ill this minute or sinful, wake up tomorrow and find out you're well or pure and I had you all wrong. Or on the other hand, if I thought you were good or healthy, and then tomorrow learned that you were arrested for something or took sick. My function, having discerned the nature of the first and second chapter of Genesis, and even before that, my function when I originally knew that the secret of human existence is the nature of good and evil, that secret enabled me and has enabled me not to judge as to good or evil, but to see God always as the real identity. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't times when I may find fault with you and complain and correct you. Oh, I do that, and to the Queen's taste sometimes. But it isn't because I have digressed from my stand. Oh no. It is only because, having seen some of the human picture needing correction, I bring it to your attention, sometimes gently and sometimes not so gently. But the Master did the same thing. He had no hesitancy in calling some people some pretty evil names. He had no hesitancy in taking the whip to some of them. And I don't think for a minute that he didn't know that they were God's image and likeness and belonged in the Garden of Eden. He did. But he also knew that temporarily they strayed outside, and he was rounding them up to get them back inside in the best way that he knew. But actually, regardless of what correction you receive from a spiritual teacher, regardless of how severe sometimes the work may be, remember this: the teacher doesn't mean it in the sense of any criticism, judgment, or condemnation of you, but in a correction of that human sense which you are permitting to handle you, and probably need some outer form of correction so that you may awaken. Now then, probably because I've taken so much of that myself, I like to give it. But the point is, and this is an absolute spiritual truth, there is neither good nor evil. And as long as you persist in having good and evil people, or good and evil conditions, or good and evil anything, you are outside the Garden of Eden. You're outside of heaven, the kingdom of heaven. You're outside of harmony. Now, do you remember that in the 8th chapter of Genesis, the 8th chapter of Romans, that we read that the man of flesh cannot please God and is not under the laws of God. And then we found that if so be that the Spirit of God dwell in you, then are you the child of God. Now remember, we're still talking about the original man of flesh when he hasn't the Spirit of God in him. That which the Master referred to in the 15th chapter of John. The same you, when you are not abiding in the Word or not letting the Word abide in you, is a branch that is cut off and withereth. But that self-same you beareth fruit richly when you abide in the Word and let the Word abide in you. So there are not two of you. There's not a real you and an unreal you. There is not a real universe and an unreal universe. There is only one universe and there's only one you, and that's the real. But this real you, the minute you know good and evil, is kicked right out of Eden. You are then the man of flesh or woman of flesh that cannot please God and is not under the law of God. But remember, the first Adam and the last Adam, these are both spiritual. The one is pure before he's kicked out, and the other is pure after he returns. And so it is that you and I are that pure child of God, born into Eden. But entertaining good and evil, we are now walking around as the man and woman of flesh that cannot please God, cannot be under the law of God, until at some given moment in your life it is revealed to you that the whole difference between the original Adam and Eve, the God-created, pure, eternal being, and you and me as we are now, the only difference is that we know good and evil. And so if we want to be the man and woman we were in the beginning, the pure creation, that which can know the crops even before they're in the ground, all we have to do is give up our knowledge of good and evil. You see, there is no good and evil. There's just our knowledge, our theory, our belief, our concept, which is called good and evil. This, at the present moment, unfolds beautifully, except for the first 10 minutes that I began when it started to bring coughs out of you, started to stir you. Except for that, it has settled down into a very pleasant acceptance. But don't forget that the period is coming when the belly's going to get very bitter. Because tomorrow you're going to have mail and telephone calls. And they're going to try their best to throw you right outside. You see, when you leave here tonight, you're going to be inside that Garden of Eden again. You're going to be pure, immortal, eternal, without sin, unashamed, knowing you have nothing to fear at all because you're inside of God's grace. It's only when tomorrow comes and the mail comes and the telephone calls come and you're tempted to walk outside the Garden of Eden with a knowledge of good and evil. And so it is that when those moments come, those temptations that come from the dear old snake, tempting us to eat the knowledge, to digest the knowledge of good and evil, remember, that is where fortitude comes in. That is where spiritual integrity comes in. That is where the will of God comes in, to be able to stand fast and ask yourself, will I ever again accept good and evil? will I ever again accept an appearance at its appearance value? Will I, even if I see a man steal a wallet, will I call him a thief? You have to be very careful. It was in 1941 that I had the unfoldment, and it's found in the book The Letters, of the nonsense of walking around saying you are spiritual, you are a spiritual idea, or your cat is spiritual, or your dog is spiritual, or your baby is spiritual. Well, if they were, they'd be immortal and eternal. What would you need truth teachings for? What would you need practitioners or teachers for? They're spiritual, being spiritual ideas. They're nothing of the kind. They're just the product of our thought. They're good today and bad tomorrow. They're well today and sick tomorrow. They're not good, they're not spiritual, they're not true. They're the product of our thought. And so I learned that we must never call anyone spiritual. We must never call anyone a spiritual idea or believe that we're dealing with spiritual ideas. Not so at all. If you can see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, it isn't spiritual. It's a mortally mental concept. It's deadly. It's of the earth, earthy. It's the man of flesh that cannot please God. It is only when you have withdrawn your estimate of what you can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, and realize it's neither good nor bad, that you are then at the beginning of a life of wisdom, a life of service to your fellow man. Because never, never, never can you serve your fellow man to the fullest while you are indulging in human good or human evil. I called attention some years ago to our students to the fact that our founding fathers gave us this wonderful Constitution which was to keep us free forever and forever and forever and forever, and how close we have been to seeing that thrown overboard and thrown right back where we were into the domination of one-man government or 12-man government. Why? Well, what those men did back there in the early days was the most marvelous human thing that was ever accomplished. They gave to this nation what no other nation had ever received before, and certainly nothing greater has ever happened to any nation since. A constitution such as ours doesn't exist anywhere on the face of the earth. Opportunities such as we have exist nowhere. But aren't they subject to the men in Washington? Certainly they are. Just get a bad enough bunch of them there and you'll see how quickly they begin to pull those things away and bring about limitation and destruction and one thing after another. And that same thing has happened all over the globe. I suppose there are some here who have traveled in Germany back in the pre-1914, 1917 days and know what a fine country it was. Know that it was probably the only country at that time of the great ones, the major ones, that had no such thing as poverty, no such thing as slavery, no such thing as ghettos. And then see the things that have happened since. We've all who've traveled this world before 1914 and since 1914, we've all seen what evil governments have done even to great nations who had all kinds of human good. And the same thing can happen again. Human good is good as far as it goes. And so far as the race is concerned, it's a marvelous thing that it has enough good men to keep the balance where it has been. But the salvation of mankind is not in good human men, nor is it in men who can win wars. Oh no, the salvation of the world is going to be in the race of people who solve the secret of the first and second chapter of Genesis, and I'm giving it to you here tonight. The secret is that as long as you have a knowledge of good and of evil, you are in the world of the man of flesh. You are that Adam and that Eve who have been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You are subject to chance and change, to accident, to limitation, to old age. When you are willing to give up your knowledge of good and evil, when you are willing to look upon all the good conditions in your life and in the world, and all the evil ones, and say, I renounce you, both of you. Henceforth I know neither good nor evil. I know only God. Only God. God manifest. Through spiritual vision I behold the first chapter of Genesis, consciousness forming itself in immortal forms, eternal forms, harmonious forms, abundant forms. Henceforth I know the first chapter of Genesis, where there is even light, where there's no sunshine, where there are crops, even if they're not planted, where all harmony is, where there's nothing to do but walk up and down the garden eternally being happy. There's no other way. This is the secret. This is the secret of harmonious living. Withdraw all your estimates and judgments of good or evil. It's difficult because at first you're going to have to live a dual life. For instance, you will see some forms of evil in the world, from evil men in high places, and there isn't any doubt that, like the Master, you might have to vote against them or whip them or talk against them. But that is probably very much the way an actor plays the part of a villain. He doesn't have to be a villain to play a part. He just has to act it. As soon as 11 o'clock comes, he takes off the makeup and he's his real self again. And so it is with us, that sometimes we have to rebuke evil, sometimes we have to vote against it, and sometimes we have to talk against it, and sometimes we have to correct children and grown-ups too. But we have to do it without actually believing it ourselves. We have to do it with the ability within to say, yes, that's the appearance world, and you haven't waked up yet to this great secret, that there is neither good nor evil. You see, nobody has to be evil once they know that good and evil are not realities, because they're fooling themselves. There again, it's like an actor in a play stealing $1 million. Isn't going to do him any good, because at 11 o'clock he'll find it isn't real money, and he can't spend it. So he only does it in the play while his lines call for it, but he doesn't really mean it. And so with us, we say things and do things in this state of dualism that we find ourselves, and it isn't any harm either, as long as within ourselves we can smile and not believe it. Remember, we're play acting. Remember that actually within ourselves we are not accepting appearances at appearance value. We are not accepting the knowledge of good and evil. You see, Christ really is the last Adam. Christ, the divine Son, is what we are. Yes, we all flesh and blood sinners. We're really Christ when we awaken to the fact that there is nothing good or evil. It's too bad that some of our old friends and relatives who haven't seen this change take place within us won't agree on this, because they remember us when. But we can't help that, because probably our face and body doesn't change enough to disguise us from them, and so we'll have to let them accept us as they knew us in those good old days, or bad old days. But we inside know better. We know that we are gathered in a room here, and that it is within the realm of possibility for each one of us to look around and say, I can agree on that. I know there isn't an evil person in this room. I know there isn't an evil thought. I know there isn't a thief. I know there isn't a liar. I know there isn't a plunderer. I know you wouldn't be here if you were that type of person, because you just couldn't sit here through an hour of this. It would just force you outside the door. You couldn't take it. Therefore, we know that there isn't an evil person in this room. Of course, now we'd have to go a little bit further and say, yes, but I know there isn't a good one either. And at first that would give us a little trouble. But as we think it over, we would go back to our little booklet, Love and Gratitude, and we'd say, yes, that's right. If there is any love flowing through me, it must be God's love. If there is any benevolence taking place in me, it must be the charity which God placed in my heart. If there is any sharing, it must be God urging it. And as you go through that little performance, you remember one time I said that a circumstance came up, and a person hurt me so deeply that I really, even with all that I know about Jesus' teaching on forgiveness, I just couldn't forgive them. And nobody's written more about forgiveness than I have, but I couldn't live up to my own writing. And so in the last analysis, I had to turn to the Father and say, look, I just can't find it in my heart to forgive them, but you do it for me. I'll turn the whole thing over to you and let you handle it. And so you see that that couldn't have been me forgiving. No. That was God doing the forgiving. I was just willing to step aside and let God's forgiveness come through. Now, so it is with each one here. You've agreed, and you can easily agree, that there are no evil people in this room. There's nobody here wants anything you've got. And certainly you don't want anything that anyone else has got, because you do know enough to know that anything that you want you can get from God. You don't need man whose breath is in his nostril. All you have to do is turn within, feel that moment of inner peace, and then whatever it is that's necessary in your life will come forth. You know that, so there couldn't possibly be any evil left in you, but, except the evil probably of judging. But now you come to that place where you have to rise higher than not seeing evil. You have to rise above metaphysics that says you mustn't see evil anywhere or believe it. Now you've got to rise above good. And you see, that's really the secret of the whole infinite way. It has been from the beginning. You'll see it in the chapter New Horizon in the Infinite Way. You have to rise above good. You have to rise above good health. You have to rise above good supply. You have to arise above the pairs of opposites. There's the secret. You have to rise above the pairs of opposites. You have to go into a realm of consciousness where inwardly, now remember, outwardly you're living your normal life, but inwardly, I won't accept it. I won't accept it. And when these calls come then, that someone's very sick and someone's very dying and someone else is in prison or in trouble, inwardly, regardless of what you say with lip service, inwardly you've got to hold to, I will not accept either good or evil. I won't do it. I won't have a patient getting better any more than I'll have a patient getting worse. I just won't have a sinner being reformed any more than I'll have a pure person becoming sinful. I'll have neither of these. I stand on is. God is. And only God is. Like the story of the religious man who couldn't get into heaven because he said, I am here. There is no I. There's only thou. And when you begin to perceive that there's only thou, then you can see why there can't be bad people and there can't be good people. Why there can't be bad conditions and good conditions. And if you have to account for them, as you do, for reason's sake, there's only one way. The good and the evil that I behold is a creation of mind, mental images, not externalized realities. Mental images in thought. The second chapter of Genesis is mind in action through thought, and it's as unreal as thought, because even thinking 2 times 2 is 4 doesn't make it so. And thinking 2 times 2 is 4 isn't 4. It's just thinking so. It never gets out of the realm of thought. It never gets into the realm of being. It's only in the realm of being when you are outside of thought, where is. 2 times 2 is 4, is 4, is. It has nothing to do with thought. It would be so even if you didn't think so, because it is. The law of like begetting like. Roses come from roses, thistles from thistles, white from white, black from black. Thinking won't make it so. Oh, no, no, no. Thinking won't make it so. It is so. And it is so if there wasn't a human being on earth to do any thinking. It is so. Thinking won't make a white hair black. Thinking won't add a cubit to your stature. Thinking won't do anything except deceive you with the product of thought and make you believe it's real. But inner silence, inner stillness, the listening attitude, in which you are taught of God, in which God utters his voice, the earth melteth. That is where true wisdom comes in. That is when you have experiences. Well, I had one many years ago when I was sitting before a patient in a very, very distressed condition and seemingly making no headway. Just couldn't seem to arrive at any point where anything would take place, any change or harmony. And I sat there, trying my best to listen, trying my best to hear, when all of a sudden the voice said, "This is my beloved child in whom I am well pleased." Well, it didn't look like it. It didn't look like it. I thought, well, if you say so, it must be so, but I can't bear witness to that. But that did produce the healing. That did produce the healing. And I had a similar experience some years later when I myself was ill. And those who were helping me just were not bringing out the healing. I seemed to be getting much worse all of the time, and finally asked that they discontinue the help. And the thought came to me, all I know is this: if these truths that I'm living by are really truth, I've got nothing to fear. If they aren't, I'm in a bad way. But there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm going to bed, and I'm going to bed knowing how ill I am, convinced that if this is the truth, I'll be all right. If it isn't, I won't wake up tomorrow morning. That's very evident. So let's see. And I went to bed, and of course when you're faced with a situation like that, it's easy to talk about it, but it isn't easy to face it. And so I heard the clock go 3 o'clock, the church chimes, before I really fell asleep. I heard nothing further till 9 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up healed at 9 o'clock in the morning. But here's what happened. A letter came to me a few days later from Providence, Rhode Island. One of my patients in Providence was awakened at 4 o'clock in the morning and got up and began to read, meditate, not knowing why she was disturbed. And all of a sudden her thought turned to me, and the voice said to her, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." And she felt well, and she went to bed. A couple of days later, I received a letter from a patient in Los Angeles, California, saying I had the very strangest experience the other day, and repeated the same story, took place on the same day. A disturbance, my face or image came, and then the words, "This is my beloved son or child in whom I'm well pleased." 9 o'clock, the healing took place. Now you see, man couldn't see in the sick person that I was the image and likeness of God. That's impossible. It is only in an inner stillness or an inner silence that God can impart to you that which is. That is the truth of being. And when that happens, the earth melteth. all sin disappears, all sickness disappears, all lack disappears. And so it is that I know that when we rise above the realm of thought, when we have no opinion as to good or evil, when we are willing to be a perfect transparency for the instruction of God, then God speaks in our ear and shows us the spiritual reality that exists right where that man of flesh seems to be, who cannot please God. And in that instant, the man of flesh who cannot please God and who is not under God's government is returned to the Garden of Eden, where he is now the Christ, and he is under God's government. Now, you or I cannot do these things by taking thought. You or I cannot do these things because we'd like to do them for each other. That isn't possible. It can only happen when you have this secret. The knowledge of good or evil is what traps you into good and evil, life and death, sickness and health. The ability to abide on the inner being with your own inner being and the realization nothing is good or evil. Only I am infinite. I am all. Then comes the peace that passeth understanding. It says, in the Garden of Eden, the false creative mind was conceived or conjured up, which is nothing but the belief of good or evil. That's what constitutes the mind, the belief of good and evil. The belief of good and evil forms and makes and constitutes the only mortal mind there is. When you have neither good nor evil, you have no mortal mind. There is neither good nor evil. This statement, there is neither good nor evil, is the secret of life for which the world of religious men have sought. They called it a search for God, a search for truth, a search for ultimate reality, a search for the Holy Grail. When they found it, if they found it, all they found was that there is neither good nor evil. When they had that, they had their foot right inside of heaven. They had it all. They had the Holy Grail. They had ultimate reality. There is neither good nor evil. And the knowledge of good and evil is the only thing that keeps us from the Holy Kingdom. I discovered the secret of life, there is neither good nor evil, about 1934 through revelation, and have been endeavoring to demonstrate it so as to avoid teaching it without signs following. In other words, don't try to tell this to anyone because you'll be a laughing stock. I'm not a laughing stock when I tell it to you because you've seen the fruitage of it. Too many of you have had healings through this work. Too many of you have experienced good through this message. So you can't laugh when I tell you that this is the secret because you've seen its fruitage. But don't expect that you can go out and write a book about it and get a publisher to publish it. No. It can't happen. And don't think you can go home and tell your relatives about it. It can't happen. You have to keep it locked up within your own self until your life bears witness to it. When you're healing somebody with it and improving them and enriching them, and they say why, and you tell them this, there's nothing they can answer back because they have no answer. You might be right. You're demonstrating it. But please remember the Master when he said, go and tell no man. Go and show the priests. Oh, yes. Surely. Talk it over among yourselves if you like. Talk to your teachers. Talk to your practitioners if you like. But don't go outside of that group to talk it until your life so bears witness to it that your family won't want to lock you up. Well, we'll continue, I think, a little further tomorrow. But now you have... Oh, I can see the questions. Thank you.